Hello and welcome to our program. Our guest today writes these edgy thrillers that have you hooked from the first page itself. But he is an author and much more. We will discover the many facets of Amitabh Pandey on our program today. Amitabh, welcome to the program.
Thank you. My pleasure and my privilege.
So let's start with the beginning of your career. You started with teaching economics.
Yep. I taught economics for 3 years at an undergraduate college of Delhi University, my university. And then shifted to government like many people in North India tend to do. And I spent
steady government job is
yes, it's very highly valued in those days at least. And I worked for 24 years with the railways. And then I quit to join the private sector where I worked for 5 years. And then I quit to write.
So is this the restlessness that we see in your books, in the protagonist?
Well, I don't know. I guess protagonists will reflect at least some portion of the author's makeup. So maybe, quite probably, yeah.
For yourself, when you worked for the government, you were with the railways.
Yep.
And there was a lot of path-breaking work you did.
Well, it was interesting work. I mean, I spent 24 years, so that was a lot of time. But the last 5 years, I worked at IRCTC building the internet ticketing system. And that was fun, particularly because we had a very young team and a very, very supportive management. And what we were doing hadn't been done before. Right. So, in government you say, what was done last time? How was it done last time?
Precedent kya hai?
Precedent kya hai? File laiye. And there was no precedent, there was no file. So we had to make it up as we went along, and that was the fun part of it. You see, the youngsters today don't quite know that India had a major revolution in the mid-90s. Yeah. I mean, before that we had no telecom worth the name at all. I mean, in small towns like the towns I was posted in, you didn't even have automatic exchanges, you had manual exchanges. You had to pick up the phone and somebody will say number please kind of thing, or not pick up your phone at all.
Yeah.
And in the mid-90s,
the not was more often than not.
Yeah, not was all the time actually. Unless you were very important in that district, your phone was never picked up. And but in 95, suddenly we got something called the internet. From having no telecom, we had mobile phones. Of course, if you remember, mobile phones were clunky and hugely expensive, and the calls were ridiculously expensive.
And I also remember people used to hold their clunky phones in their hands so that others knew that they have a phone.
Of course, it was the sort of status symbol. I mean, like in our college days, 20 years before that, if you had imported jeans, so you had to go to tell somebody that my jeans is imported. But that changed so rapidly. In 95 it all started, and by 2000, in the turn of the century, e-commerce had more or less begun. I mean, the internet had become significant.
Yeah.
And Amazon had started in 95, so the concept of selling things through this weird thing called the internet had already come to the universe, to our universe.
The problem with us here in India was that, trusting something that you can't actually have a tactile feel of.
Absolutely. In fact, that is, in my personal opinion, the major contribution that IRCTC has made to India, to the Indian economy, is that it established e-commerce as something safe, valid, viable and convenient. It was a sarkari thing, so there was no worry about somebody taking your money and running away. So the safety of it, the viability of it, the acceptability of it is what IRCTC contributed, apart from the actual fact of being able to buy a railway ticket online instead of standing in queues for hours on end,
or not bribing the middleman,
or not going through a middleman. So in any society which has made such a sudden transition, you need somebody to sort of hold your hand, metaphorically speaking, and say, no, this is all right, you can try this, it is safe, it is doable,
so
don't worry about it.
Was that uphill? Because let's face it, it was in the government, and we don't normally imagine government officials to have great imagination and to think disruptively and to come up with a revolution of this sort.
No, but you see, sometimes fate works in very peculiar ways. You are absolutely right. Government tends to make decisions in a very conservative manner.
Yeah.
And the internet was very new. Selling things on the internet, nobody was doing, you know.
Yeah.
But you see, when we put up this proposal to the Ministry of Railways, we got approval in 7 days. That's not a joke. I kept a note of it, you know. 7 days.
That's incredible.
It's incredible because the people at that point of time in the board who were responsible for taking the decision, one of them had trained as a computer programmer in his early days in the railways. Railways had introduced computers, mainframe computers, long time ago. And this gentleman, who was now at the top, had worked as a programmer. So he did not need to be convinced that this is possible. He knew it was possible. You see, otherwise you would have to spend months or years trying to convince them that this can be done, it has been done by Amazon, we'll also do it, etc. But the two, in fact, the two most important people to take this decision were both computer buffs, fully familiar with what computers could do. So they needed no conviction, no persuasion. They said, oh, okay, karna theek hai. In 7 days they gave approval. Now it is so unusual that I keep repeating it, that it happened in 7 days in government. So sometimes it can happen.
It can happen.
It can happen.
When the stars are right and
when
the time
stars
is right.
are right, the right people are there, and they just in 7 days we got approval, project approved.
What were the challenges then for you?
The existing IT infrastructure had to be linked to, they call it integration in their jargon. So we had to integrate with the existing passenger reservation system, which was computerized in the 80s. So the background, the back office was already available. We had to make an internet customer facing front end, a business end to deal with our customers and connect to the railways. So it was not really rocket science at all. Technology wise, we were not doing anything wonderfully new. It had been done before, so it was not rocket science. So the challenge was essentially in the mind, that we have to convince the customer and build something that the customer will find convenient, acceptable, not weird and strange, and it has to, and in the Indian customer is demanding, like all customers. So you have to treat him well, customer friendly.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds it's a bit of a jargon, but it's true. You're giving him something utterly new. So it has to be easy. It has to work well, reasonably well. Nothing is perfect, but it has to work reasonably well.
But there were a lot of hiccups, weren't there?
Not a lot, really speaking. I mean, our refunds were processed the same night. In those days, there were no e-tickets, there were paper tickets. They were normally, in fact, that was one of the success stories. They were normally delivered the day after you booked.
Okay.
Because the courier business in India had matured by that time. Yeah. And the big courier companies were prepared to accept it in the evening and deliver it tomorrow. So, in fact, we were quite overwhelmed by the acceptance of it, because that we thought would be the biggest challenge. People will say, "Bhai, ye kya hai? This is something new. How can I trust it? What will happen to my ticket? I'll pay in advance, then my ticket will come. Suppose it doesn't come," and so forth. But the rapidity with which the customer accepted, and we insisted on online payments. In fact, that was one thing that people everywhere had said, ki who's going to pay online in India? Bhai, we've never heard of these things. America mein hota hai, Hindustan mein nahi hota. And nobody is going to agree. But everyone did, very soon. So the Indian customer is very, very sharp and very adaptable.
That of course is true. Sometimes they tend to be more adventurous than expected, but not everybody had access to the internet.
True.
So that was the time then you either went to the local cyber cafe and paid there, or that methodology.
No, see, as I said, we had just started the internet revolution in India. So this was in a sense a kind of pilot project.
Yeah.
That it went so far so quickly is simply that the Indian customer said, "This works, yaar, let's do this." Instead of standing in line, we'll go somewhere, find some computer which has internet and get it done. So formally it was a pilot project, because the internet hadn't expanded to homes very much, and cyber cafes were crowded little places, dingy places, So true, it was not a mass phenomenon at that point in time, but it soon became, because the internet spread so rapidly.
Yeah, it became an exponential
From
thing
about
in India.
2005 to 7,
Yeah.
if you see the TRAI figures, there's a zooming growth
Yeah.
in internet,
Yeah.
in access to the internet with people, and we rode on that. So I mean, they probably, I'm not sure they sort of interacted with each other in any sense, but we certainly rode on that huge acceleration in internet access.
Yes, and it was that first revolution that has led us to a point where we just carry the ticket on the phone. You don't need anything else.
So it was when in the 90s the government said open telecom. They probably wouldn't have thought of, probably they did, the kind of huge change that they are going to bring to the whole society. I mean, not just the economy, to society.
Yeah, that entire phase of liberalization of the
Yes,
economy,
exactly.
that changed everything for India.
And in our context, in the context of the internet, I mean, from not having telephones, we suddenly had something called the internet. You can access the universe on it.
Yeah. Of course, before that, we had those ubiquitous yellow boxes all over the place where anyone could, just walk half a kilometer and find a phone.
Yeah, you had public call booths. It was
Yeah.
big business. Get a license so that you get nice income.
Yeah.
Now everyone has a phone in their hands.
Yeah.
So it has been it has not really found its place in the public media that we have gone through a revolution.
We have, yeah.
And that revolution has had many spin-offs. We were one of those spin-offs.
The moment this became successful, you decided to leave.
Well, yeah, I left.
You thought
a year
you had
later.
done your bit, and it was time
I
to
mean,
move on.
in government, things are very formal. When you go to another company like the IRCTC was a company owned by the railways. You have a period of deputation.
Okay.
So when my period of deputation ended, I went back to the railways, and by then I had got this taste for e-commerce project building, and going back to what I had been doing for 25 years, 20 years odd, wasn't so much fun. And of course, an opportunity came. I mean, one can't do things without a serious opportunity, but a serious opportunity did come. So I went on to build more e-commerce platforms and systems for another 5 years.
But none of this seems to have space really for a budding author. So when did that happen?
Well, all my life I've been reading extensively. That's been my only hobby. And from
this is a hobby you picked from your parents, didn't you?
Yes, they have. They are great readers themselves, and so books were always about in the house. All sorts of books, and books were never said no to. I mean, whatever else may be forbidden, but books, anytime, any number. So, after all these years of reading, I did feel that perhaps I should try my hand at it too. And when I quit working finally, I said, well, we've been reading all these years, 55 odd years. Let's try writing something, something which is worth reading. And so it started.
So what were the kind of books you were reading that led you to start with thrillers?
Well, I've been reading all sorts of stuff. What you might call escape literature, thrillers, detectives, etc., very extensively, but a lot more. I mean, I read, I wasn't very structured, but I read across a whole range of stuff. But I read a lot of thrillers and detective novels, amusers, and decided to start with an amuser because that I knew best.
This character that you've created, Gautam Shukla.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about him. I called him James Bond because, in a sense, he's not a flawed character. When you look at other characters like Sherlock Holmes or Joe Reacher, they are flawed. Here's a guy who's so perfect. Is that aspirational or?
No, I'm not sure I succeeded in doing what I wanted to do because, again, you see, when you actually start writing, you realize that it's all been written before.
That is
everybody has written everything before. Somebody has written before. But you try to create what you feel would be interesting in itself, even if the general pattern is the same everywhere. So Gautam Shukla is flawed. I disagree with you there. He is flawed. He has a commitment problem. He is emotionally flawed. and he is emotionally distressed because of all the violence that he's been seeing and doing all his working life, which is why he leaves.
The reason why I say he's not flawed is, although he has commitment issues, he's not, he hasn't become cynical. The love for art, the love for literature. He quotes Homer.
Yes, yes, no, he has,
and his treatment of women is, he's gentle and egalitarian. It's not like.
Yeah, yes, I mean, I feel strongly about that. So my hero has to. I mean, that he can't be some macho, redneck sort of, abusing women. But so he is. No, he is aesthetic. He has a well-developed aesthetic sense. He is his Japan sort of exposure, very Japanese minimalistic kind of thing. He reads, but he is very lonely and a lonely character because of his life experience. His mother died in the Sarojini Nagar bomb blast, which I was 3 minutes away from when it happened. I used to live there, very near Sarojini Nagar in Chanakyapuri. So he is flawed in an emotional sense. Otherwise, no, he is gentle. He treats women well. He doesn't treat them badly at all. Respects them, and he just wants to sort of go away into the hills and live quietly. He's had enough bloodshed and enough of violence, but violence keeps after him. That's how the stories evolve.
That is his destiny, really.
That is his destiny in some sense. That is how the stories evolve. But he is trying to get away from it. Again, this is a very old pattern,
But he tries to retire early, like you do.
Yes.
You did in your life.
Yes, I did.
So in that sense, do you find a lot of yourself reflected in Gautam?
Oh no, I have none of his, phenomenal qualities at all, except the desire to live quietly. I think that is a common quality. Other than that, no.
So you also want to go to the hills and develop agriculture in some sort of way?
Well, that is just a dream. So I fair enough. It is my dream to retire to the hills someday. And now you can't develop anything very much. The hills have become very expensive. But you can certainly live very quietly there in a very still quite unspoilt environment. I mean, it's still unspoilt once you go a little beyond the first range of hills, which is utterly built up now.
So are you now kind of done and dusted with Delhi in that sense? Does it disappoint you?
I am an old Dilliwala. I mean, I studied here and I have worked here and so forth, but Delhi is crumbling at the edges. I mean, in fact, if you've been away from North India as I have in Western India, you find that society is very different. It's a very, very important thing, because in North India we have a certain degree of aggression and I don't know how to put it, a lack of civilization, which you find in Western India. I personally found in Western India. In fact, you might appreciate this, the attitude towards women. If you go to Mumbai and you compare it with Delhi, there's no comparison. There's no comparison at all. So when you've sort of been all over the place like I have in my working life, you realize that there are other worlds and they might be more civilized than your own. So
why I asked you about Delhi in particular is that if you look at the various protagonists in your novels, Delhi is definitely one very strong character.
No, certainly, because
and it is a very romantically drawn out character. The mention of Lodi Gardens and Nehru Park and all the havens that we have around Delhi are beautifully described.
As I said, I'm a Dilliwala. I've spent years here. So there is a attachment to a place that you've sort of been brought up in. But then over time I've seen the limitations of the place. I mean, if you live in Western India long enough, you drop into Delhi and you say, oh God, now I have to summon up all my aggression and all my, I'll be fighting with this fellow and fighting with that fellow, and there is this sort of
survival instinct of being aggressive.
Well, whatever instinct you want to call it, but things are not like this in the West of India. I mean, there is more, people are more business-like. You do your work and you move. Nobody wants to sort of waste time, and there is a sense of professionalism in the west of India, in Mumbai and in Maharashtra, and Gujarat I haven't lived in, but I believe also in Gujarat, which is not found in North India. As my son, who when he shifted to Mumbai with us, for a year he was there, he said, you know, nobody has asked me, what does your father do? Which is the first question they ask you in Delhi.
The first question they ask you is, "Aap kahan se ho?"
No, fair enough. And then, what is your status?
Yeah.
You know, what does your father do?
Yeah.
He said, nobody has asked me what my father does. So, which is a very, very good illustration of the difference between North India and Mumbai and Western India.
Do you think this is because, of course, Delhi we know is a city of immigrants, but so is Bombay, Mumbai. Delhi is also, because of being the capital, it has a lot of officials because there are so many offices. Do you think that is what?
No, there's a lot of government in Mumbai. Mumbai is the capital of the biggest, richest state in this country, more or less. So it's not that there is no government there or government doesn't have a presence there, but there is something other than government which is valid, which is business and professions and so on. Whereas it appears, which is not really a fact, but that's the psychological sort of fact, that in Delhi the first thing is that which colony do you live in, which will show what is your daddy's status. I mean, that whole, which is why Lutyens Delhi, in fact, Lutyens Delhi in this book is a symbol of that privileged, powerful, entitled kind of existence, which is part of government, which is part of Lutyens Delhi. Raja versus the Praja.
The bureaucracy that we have to deal with.
The bureaucracy which rules, I mean, they talk about ruling instead of serving. It's not serving. It's
Before we come back to Love in Lachan's Delhi, let's talk about the two books that you've written, the Himalayan series. Are you putting an end to it?
Oh no, the series will continue, hopefully.
Yeah, because that would be disappointing for your readers.
I'm working on the third one at the moment. It's a little slow at the moment, but yes, the series hopefully will go on.
Now, what is very interesting about your Himalayan series is your deep insight into, say, the first one, into the army life, for example. When you describe in the beginning, in the first few pages, the action that takes place, it's so precise, so clinical, and so cold in its description. It's almost like playing a video war game.
Well, I've read a lot about, as I said, I read a lot of escape literature, which included a lot of thrillers. And as a child, I've been, seen a lot of the army. My father was posted in Jammu. And, so one is very familiar with army folk and the army structures, I mean, personally. And it is an institution which is a state institution, and I worked in another state institution for so long. So one understands more or less how things function.
But both these institutions are totally different from each other in terms of...
True, but there are common traits, I would say, I mean, there is a Ministry of Defence, just as there is a Ministry of Railways or a Ministry of this and that, and one knows how ministries function. So it's familiarity with a generic kind of familiarity with the institutions of state, essentially. And the action bit is just what one has read over the years. I mean, one has read all this stuff all over the place.
So there wasn't a particular kind of research that you involved in?
No, not really, no. One doesn't, that's not required really. I mean, I don't write, technical details of, like a lot of authors do, and nobody knows if those technical details are right or wrong, or whether they have any meaning at all, so many millimeters of this and that. I mean, I personally don't feel that's very interesting, The normal reader is not interested in technical details of weaponry and so forth. He's interested in pace and action and plot. So, one doesn't. I personally feel one doesn't need to go into technical details of stuff like this. One has to focus more on how the story goes, and that's the more important thing.
So what is the process for you? Do you have a plot line in mind, or do you just kind of let it flow generically?
I have a very rough plot line in mind, and then I let it flow. Very rough. I don't work out everything in advance. In fact, many things happen out of the blue. Many characters emerge out of the blue. You know, I used to laugh at authors when they say, "Oh, this character insisted on doing this." I say, "No, what nonsense is this?" But actually, it's true. Sometimes you start a character with something in mind, and then that character decides to be something quite different. So, you know, it happens.
So how do you deal with these maverick characters?
Oh, I let them do what they feel like doing, you know, because very often it happens that you start off building something and suddenly halfway through it all changes. And if you like the way it's going, you say, fine, this change is good. You just change it. One has to be flexible enough. I mean, I have to be flexible enough.
You know, one very interesting comment that was made about the Himalayan series was that your positive characters, the heroes or the protagonists, are beautifully etched and they are different. But your negative characters are kind of more stereotypical or more stock characters. Is that because you have your own, you know, one doesn't like to delve into the darker side? Is that it?
I haven't really tried to delve too deep into the darker side, fair enough. Because in a thriller, the focus is on the principal protagonist primarily, and that's a limitation. I mean, what you said is a limitation. I'll have to work on it. I mean,
no, it's an observation.
No,
it's
it's a very good observation. It's a limitation of imagination. I mean, in that one, if the negative character, the bad guy, is stereotypical bad and not a character in itself, then that's a limitation, and that should be corrected. And I'll see what I can do about it.
I wouldn't agree with that at all, because you know the positive is so positive and so wonderful. Like, I think for many readers, Gautam Shukla is the perfect character in that sense. That the negative doesn't really matter in that sense.
Fair enough, but the negative should also be complete in itself. And if there is a missing dimension, then I should do something about it.
Maybe
so I've noted this.
So maybe you'll have to look for the darker side in yourself somewhere. Tap
Wherever.
very deep.
Find the dark side, and the dark side is all around us. So it doesn't take much looking, but one has to pay more attention to it. That's the point, and that's a good point. That's a very good point.
You know, a lot of authors these days are engaging with their readers through blogs and social media. You don't seem to be doing that.
No, I don't blog, but I am on social media, not enormously active. Yes, I think that's a generational thing. I mean, you know, I don't particularly think it's significant for the universe to know that I had cereal this morning. I mean, you know, it's so my involvement with social media is relatively limited, but I am on all of them. I mean, I am on Facebook, my books.
No, in the sense that a lot of authors, the ones who are writing these days, do tend to engage with their readers, and there is an interaction going on where they'll say, okay, fine, we don't like the trajectory of this character, and discussions go on. In that sense, they engage with
Fair enough. No, my level of engagement, intensity of engagement is limited. I agree. That's a personal inclination. I mean, I tend to be less forward and, you know, or social. So that's a limitation again. Fair enough. Perhaps one should do more of that. I don't know. I'll have to think about it.
It's how people approach writing, because traditionally writing is supposed to be a very lonely space that one has to enter. So when we meet authors who say that they engage constantly with readers, that is really surprising. So it's nice to meet somebody who follows the traditional way of writing.
Well, but I think that shows my age. That I tend not to go out and try to sort of interact very much.
That also helps to maintain the mystery somewhere, no?
I don't know about that. Perhaps it does. Instead of not talking about the characters all the time and sort of, would you like this and would you like that? It's just a personality trait, I suspect. I mean, although business-wise, I suppose it'd be better if I do interact, but I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Does business affect you? Do you think of a target audience when you're writing?
Not really, no. No. I write if I feel strongly enough about something and I want to write about it, I write about it. I am not, I don't start the other way around it. Who should I write for and then write something for them? I write what I feel I should write and then hope that somebody will read it.
And is it difficult for you then to find the right publisher? How do you go about that?
Oh, that's a different kettle of fish, you know. For all writers, getting noticed by a publisher is an act of God in itself, you know, because
I think it would be easier to meet God.
I'm sure it is. I'm pretty sure it's easier to find God than to find a publisher. I spent a couple of years sending my book blindly here and there and not even getting a reply. Until I did, by sheer coincidence and by sheer luck, I did the right thing, which is to find an agent whom publishers listen to.
Oh, that's the trick.
That is the trick.
So for all
At
the
least
budding,
that's the trick which worked for me. And
so for all the budding writers who are watching
yes,
this
for
program,
all the budding writers, find a good agent, because by yourself you're not going to be looked at by anyone unless you're phenomenally lucky. I mean, you know, and one can't wait for luck for too long. So in fact, it was a pure chance. A cousin of mine said, "Oh, what happened about your book?" I said, "Nothing." You know, and she said, no, I know this person who's started off as a literary agent who spent her working life in publishing. So why don't you meet her? So I said, sure, anything, you know. And
have you noticed fate has a lot to do with what you do?
Absolutely. As you grow older, you realize that you don't really control your life. When you're young, you feel, you know, I'll do this and do that. And as you grow older, you realize that, you know, everything else happens to you. You just deal with it.
Does that make you more spiritual or more fatalistic?
I don't know about spiritual, but fatalistic is a very depressing word. No, but it's perhaps mature.
Do you believe in synchronicity? Do you believe in things?
Synchronicity is again a difficult concept, because synchronicity, if I remember right, is, you know, if things happen, as Jung said about synchronicity, that sometimes things happen coincidentally.
Yeah.
I really don't know, but what I do know is that you don't control most of your life.
Yeah.
And most of the time you have to simply deal with what happens. It's very rare that you actually make something happen suo moto, you know. Most of the time things happen and you deal with it. And
so as Krishna says in the Gita, you can't control what's happening. You can only control the way you react to what's happening.
You deal with it. No, well, fair enough. And I think it's absolutely spot on that, I mean, if one looks at one's life, you realize that, you know, either you deal well or you deal badly. But all you're doing is dealing with things. You know, it takes a very arrogant kind of mind to say, I make things happen. I mean, very few of us actually make anything happen. Things happen to us.
Yeah. So when publishers read your manuscript and say, "Acha, isko yahan se edit karo, wahan se karo," are you able to cope with that? Or?
Yeah, I can handle it. Because I'm very critical about what I write.
Yeah.
And I have a very critical first editor at home, that's my wife, who edits. So I try to keep an open mind.
Okay.
I don't necessarily accept everything that's told to me. I don't. Can be very obstinate when I want to be. But I listen to everything, because one never knows where one can get a good suggestion.
Sure, yeah.
So I deal with it fair enough, you know. I look at it quite openly and say, okay.
So you're easy going but not a walkover?
No, I'm easy going in the sense that I accept any suggestion for consideration.
Right.
But I am not easy to convince against my will. If I feel no, then I don't agree. And that's it. Which is, I think, a fair enough attitude.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about love in Lachan's Delhi now. Now this is segueing completely from what you've written so far.
Yes, absolutely. It's one has to try new things, and after all, love is a universal subject. I mean, they've been talking about it ever since, you know, human beings started to write, I guess. So it's
but for somebody who started off with thrillers and intends to continue with thrillers.
Well, yes, this was a story that was with me for a long time. In fact, I wrote the first draft a long time ago, more than 10 years ago.
Okay.
On paper, in a register, you know, it was a story I wanted to tell. And my wife read through it and said, junk, rewrite. Throw away or rewrite. So that it sat doing nothing for 10 years or more. And then after I published my first book, I just mentioned it to my agent. And she heard the rough story and she said, rewrite it, but rewrite it, do rewrite it and show it to me. So then I sat down and rewrote it. So it was something which was there much before the thrillers were, but had to be redone. And when I redid it and showed it to her, and she said, yes, let me see if I can place it, and she did.
Now these are also very interesting lovers that you have, Akriti and Sanjay, Sanju.
Sanjay, yeah.
Who have to now figure out how their relationship works long distance.
Yeah, no, in fact, the core of the story, which is very straightforward, again, as I said, is nothing very new, is that you have a young couple who've known each other from kindergarten, and when they grow up, they come face to face with the realities of life, which is Lutyens' Delhi in Sanju's case.
Yeah.
And Lutyens' Delhi, which is traditional, orthodox, has a certain view of community, region, caste, it has a certain point of view, and that point of view doesn't mesh with the rest of stuff that's happening in his life.
Yeah.
And so the question is, and this was, this was an issue in our time, and I'm sure it continues to be an issue now, is that how do you deal with this? The change has happened.
Yeah.
You meet people of the opposite sex which you did not do earlier. Can you possibly take it far enough, or is it just something which is all right for children but not when you grow up? Then you have to look back into the traditional mechanisms of relationship. So it's that's the attempt to explore that issue of how young women are now educated, they are professional, they are probably earning more than half the men. And can you sort of accept that? As a man, is a man able to accept this change easily enough? And is his society, the Lutyens' Delhi, the symbol of Lutyens' Delhi, is that prepared to accept this? And how do you deal with it? So it's in my view, it's a very real issue, which is interesting enough to write about. So I decided to write about it.
And where did you get the inspiration for it?
Oh, you don't need an inspiration for this. These are stories one has seen my generation, because perhaps my generation saw this conflict particularly sharply. One has seen many of these stories.
Interestingly, there is no judgment about the fact that here's a woman who wants to find out who she is, she wants to follow her dream. There is no judgment about it.
No, in fact, it would be the other way around.
From the author's point of view.
That's from the author's point of view, that's what the way we should go, and then that women are not confined to the kitchen. Why can't the men cook? And when did the man last rinse the dishes? And what I have tried to do is to not give a judgment on the man, because I would tend to be judgmental in this context, but I've tried to not sort of completely condemn the guy for not growing up. Essentially, in this story, the man takes a lot of growing up and he doesn't quite do it enough. And
that seems to be a problem of our times.
I think it's a real issue. It is a real issue. In that sense, it is a slice of life. That while women have changed, a certain set of women, the urban, educated, professional women have totally changed, whereas the corresponding male has not. And I think that creates a lot of stress, because the definition of woman in his head is something quite different from the woman that he sees in front of him, as a boss, as a colleague, as a junior. So I think that's a very real issue.
It is a huge issue.
It's a real issue, and I think it's an issue that should be talked about and written about, and you should have stories about it.
Yeah, and in fact, when people read this, because this is not ostensibly a morality story at all, but when you read about it, these are the questions that come to the mind. So hopefully,
well, if they do, excellent. That is the objective of the exercise, to raise these issues in a story which should be worth reading, which should be fun to read, and should sort of conjure up some questions about what's wrong with this guy, and why can't he sort of do this or that. And I think it's a real issue. I mean, I have felt it as a real issue, you know, while I was growing up and seeing the world around me, and I feel that it still is a real issue.
So what was your kind of up close and personal kind of dealing with this issue? Did you see it in your family or in your friends or siblings?
I've seen it around me all the time. Not particularly in my family, because personally we were allowed to go do our own thing. And so that was not an issue personally. It was not a problem I had to deal with. I mean, you know, it was not non-issue.
Okay.
But it was certainly an issue around me, all around me. So that was important.
What is interesting is that you know, this issue has existed now for a very, very long time.
Yep.
It's about time that people started thinking differently about what women are all about.
Exactly.
But not too many people seem to observe this or notice this.
Yes, it's painful. Well, if you want to be cynical, it's all about power, you see. I mean, who wants to lose power? And we are a patriarchal society. I mean, the eldest male dictates, and the woman is certainly 3 steps below him, you know. Stick to the kitchen and look after the children, you know. You don't have a third. I mean, okay, we are stereotyping, but the point is this stereotype is real.
Yeah, it is.
In most of our society, in much of our society. And certainly in the minds of men. And which is what has to change. I mean, because they, I mean, and this has been talked about all the time, but while women have changed very fast in a certain segment of society, the men have not. And it's time they did, you know.
I think it's time somebody educated them.
No, well, that is a different question altogether, but it certainly has created stress in relationships. Because, you know, if you are, I need to be served, and you have to serve me, then, you know, and the other person says, sorry, you know, we are not here to serve anybody. So it's an obvious stress point, and I think that's growing in our society. As women grow and men don't.
I think because these are ideas which they are new, because they're just maybe a couple of decades old. So that oscillation has to happen. The pendulum has to swing in different directions before it comes to its, it finds its center.
Yeah, but I don't see it swinging very much in the sort of productive direction at the moment. I mean, it certainly is moving, obviously, but should be much more.
So do you think you will write something else on similar lines to?
I don't know. It's
because, as you said, your thrillers are escapist fare. But
yeah, but I love them.
So do your readers.
I hope so. Well, maybe, because these are issues which are both significant and they involve one. You know, you feel strongly about these things when you see this reality around you. So maybe, let's see. First, I have to finish my 3rd thriller.
You have to finish your 3rd thriller, and when do you think it's coming out?
I don't know. No, I can't say this.
Do you work on deadlines? No.
Not really. Not till now. No. But I've had a bit of a backlog available. So, in fact, my next book, also by Pan Macmillan, is on e-commerce. Okay. From what I learned building e-commerce. So that's the next immediate task at hand. That's about August, they say, August, September. And
but that must be easy writing for you, no?
No, it's written already. Again, I had written that some time ago, and I just have to update it.
So when you write something like Love in Lachin's Delhi, or when you're working on your thrillers, or you write non-fiction e-commerce stuff, do you have to kind of tap into different parts of your brain? Is it how does it work for you?
No, it's well, it is different experiences, but there's no great effort because it's all there. I mean, one can only write about what is in one, so it's there. It's not an exercise in sort of tapping this part of one or that part of one. It's all there. So one has to just sort of pull it out and put it down in an effective manner.
Now you know that pulling it out and putting it down is usually the tough part, because
yes, very painful
and very tedious sometimes.
Yeah, it's an effort. It's an actual effort. Even though you're doing nothing, you're sitting on the sofa. I sit on a sofa with a laptop on my lap and I stare at the wall.
Okay.
And you're just sitting there saying, I want to write something today, but it's not happening. So it is an effort.
So you do you have that writer's block?
It happens sometimes, yes. Well, nothing. Somebody told me, when you can't do what you feel is your number one creative act, do some number two creative act. So I bake bread instead.
Oh, you like to bake bread?
Yeah, and
that's
cook.
Interesting.
Yes, and cook. So
and who do you break bread with?
I break bread at home with my wife and me. My son's off, so it's just two of us. But I bake bread on my own and cook on my own with a lot of help and consultancy. But yes, I mean, one can't write when one feels like writing. It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
With me. I mean, there are people who might find writing easy. I don't find it easy. It's difficult.
No, but a lot of people, like say Amitabh Ghosh, when they write, it's a discipline from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. at the computer or whatever laptop.
Yeah.
If nothing else, you're just cleaning out your previously written sentences or pages or something, but you're there at your desk.
No, I am perhaps a little less disciplined. But once I start writing, then yes, there is the element of structure that, I sit down and stare at the computer screen for some time. But normally I write first I write it in my head.
Okay.
More or less, I write the whole chapter out. So that when I'm actually at the computer, I'm writing. Otherwise, I don't. In fact, what I said was not correct. I don't stare at the computer screen because I don't open the computer screen if I don't have it ready to write.
Okay.
So, but getting to that stage where you're ready to write is not easy.
So how do you prep yourself? Do you walk? Do you exercise? Listen to music? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I do all of that, but not for writing. For writing, I have to sit somewhere quiet and just sort of
let it flow.
Let it flow in my head and write it in my head. That is just the way I do it. Write the whole thing out.
Your hero Gautam is extremely fit.
Yes.
What do you do for
I'm not so fit, but well, I walk and I do a set of exercises.
Okay.
But as somebody told me that exercise keeps you fit, it doesn't get you to lose weight.
So yoga can help you being fit.
Yeah, I do some bits of yoga. I do what they call plank, which is it's tough, but it's good. And I do some back exercises, which are also all yogic exercises, Naukasana and so forth, and Bhujanga. So bits and pieces of yoga I do.
Well, thank you so much for being on our program today.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you very much for having me on.
With that, we take leave for today. Until next time, goodbye.